There's a lot of misconceptions. In fact, the field test one isn't even on our list. It just kind of, something that jumped to mind. And what we wanted to do is equip you with the ability to talk about this with your students or with your teachers or colleagues or administration if you are a teacher, uh, and just dispel some myths, even maybe that you have your own myths. And so the first one I wanted to talk about is the content of the test is radically different. So you'll notice that when we were talking about the ACT changes, we were talking about the amount of items, we were talking about the length of the passages, we were talking about the amount of time spent. One thing we didn't talk about as a change is the content alignment that's in the test. So we're talking about like the college and career readiness standards. So there was, initially when it was all happening, some chatter out in the world that we may see some standards disappear, introduction of standards. But the reality is that it hasn't changed. The test covers the same standards that you've seen. So if you're familiar with the college or career readiness standards, or if you're familiar with the reporting categories, however you like to think about the ACT, all of the same standards are there. The big change that they've done to the content is there's been some changing the proportionality of what's on the test. So certain standards are de-emphasized a little bit, certain ones are emphasized a bit more. The kind of a rebalancing that's happened, but you're not going to see anything like totally disappear or any new things added. So no calculus is on the ACT. We're still going to see trigonometry. Like all of that's going to be the same. So let's talk about the next one, which is the math questions are the easy ones are gone. So let's talk about where that misconception comes from. So Craig, um, talk about the math structure changes. What's changed to the math test?
Well, a good orientation point is the current or former version of the test, right? So in math, there is a gradual, as a trend, there's a gradual increase in difficulty from the beginning of the test to the end of the test, right? If you sample one random question in the back 10, it's going to be much harder on average than one random question in the front 10 of the math test. And so that's a structural element to the test that is not going away. And I think there was some just chatter among educators that maybe it would be the front uh, chunk of the test. The way they're getting rid of reducing the number of questions is just cutting off the front part of the test. So you're sort of just jumping in into the middle and higher difficulty questions, and that's just not the case. So, but that was sort of the and I've heard it a few times. That's just sort of the start of the rumor there. There's still going to be kind of a similar sort of curve of difficulty, but the quote unquote easier questions are the questions that are associated with the lowered numbered college readiness standards are still quite present in the math exam.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that goes into, one of the ways that the ACT structures its content and the content, their standards is they incorporate rigor into their standard alignments. And going back to the first bullet point, none of those lower level rigor items or standards are out on any of the sections. And so you're still going to see some of the more foundational topics, the 201s, the 301s showing up on the test. So, yeah, what we're seeing in the sample test is it looks more like there's been reduction across the spectrum, and not just, like you said, sample to the front. Or if you had the reverse idea and thinking like, woohoo, those last 15 are just like chopped off, like that's not what they did either. It's definitely interspersed. So the next one I want to talk about is actually it's connected is the difficulty of the test. The test is easier, or again, the test is harder. This is an easy misconception, probably one of the easiest misconceptions, because when you look at the way the test is structured, there's fewer questions, there's more time afforded to the students, the passages are shorter. The interpretation is, hey, the test is going to be easier. But this is really not the case because the ACT is a norm reference test, which means that even though well, Craig, kind of curious your take. Like, explain in your best take, your best chance you can, in simple common language. What would be a norm reference test?
What it means is that the test is going to the enhanced ACT test and its scoring curve and what it's saying is calibrated the same way as the former version of the test, right? And so it goes back to this concept that subjectively the student will experience, they might feel a little different while they take the test, right? They might feel like, oh, I had a little bit more time, I had a little more breathing room, there was less is less demanding in certain ways, right? But it's more demanding in other ways, right? Because again, each question is worth more, and this test is still going to differentiate between student ability levels in the same way as it has in the past, which is part of why so many colleges and institutions and states rely on the data. It's still going to be a reliable indicator there, and it means that on average, right? Let's say because this is a question administrators might have or educators might have. If all of my students took the former version of the test, and then all my students again take the new version of the test without any other things happening, without any other learning, without any other preparation, you're going to have uh, a very similar score distribution. You're not going to magically have more students meeting the college ready benchmark. You're not going to magically have less students meeting the college ready benchmark. There might be little shifts among individual students because it might highlight their strengths and weaknesses slightly differently. But the tests are calibrated together. And so anyway, I don't know if I satisfied your plain English or short requirements there for your introduction, Oliver, but I gave it my best shot.
It was pretty close. And I think like one of the ways, and this is maybe oversimplification, it's a bell curve essentially, right? So you're looking at a bell curve as a bell curve. And so there's in general that distribution is the same. So a 30 on the math, it's going to be a 30 in the math from test to test, just because of the nature of how it's structured. There's a question from the audience, which is, I think, maybe a good point to point out here because we're talking about the structure of the test and how it's scored and everything. But the question is from David there. It says, where can we find examples of the new test for students and or teachers to reference for ACT prep? So if you go to ACT.org or, do a Google search for their enhanced test, they have a sample practice test available there right now. It is a digital format, but you can pull that up and see how like the online test works. It even has some of the same tools that you're going to see in the real test. That is a good starting point, and that test is a great research item. We looked at ourselves and definitely recommend that you start there. We'll talk a bit too because we also at Mastery Prep offer practice testing in the new form for enhanced test, the enhanced test, and that's another place where you know we can talk about. We have samples, we have a lot of information that we can share about that as well. And Craig, do you want to add anything to our side of the equation?
I am adding a link in the chat that if you click there and you scroll down a bit, you'll see full-length practice tests, um, timed and untimed versions of the online practice tests in the new format. So straight from
Cool.
AC.
Perfect. All right, let's go to the last misconception here, which is paper and pencil is going away. So this is a really easy one to answer. So the ACT has added this online experience. They've revamped what they're offering. It's really easy to interpret that to mean paper and pencil is gone, but it will be a choice. So there will be a computer version of the test, an online version of the ACT, and then there will be a paper and pencil version available. So you're not going to lose access to that with again the caveat that it is a choice. It may not be your choice depending on what your state or district or school has decided. So let's talk a bit
That's
about
a
our
that's a major
oh
differentiator between ACT and the digital SAT, right? So, the students being able to do paper and pencil, regardless of whether they have accommodations or not, is a strength that ACT has over the SAT. It's one additional choice that students and their parents can make if you're going the ACT route.
yeah, absolutely.